History is full of territories, cities, nations, localities that pioneered certain strange and notable dimensions of God. But sadly, those dimensions were robbed eventually. They were hijacked by the inability of those who were used to pioneer those revivals. They knew how to birth revivals, but they did not know how to preserve it. Are we together? Preservation is very important. It matters to God that the generations that come, that our children and our children's children, they must be able to hold on to the template of our convictions. And there is a system designed to make your child and your child's child know and believe your God. There is nothing as dangerous and disheartening for a father as seeing his child not serve his God. It says, as for me and my house, not as for me alone, not as for me and my wife. Transgenerational relevance is important in the kingdom. That the scope of our relevance must not just transcend our lifetime or the jurisdiction of our relevance as apportioned by God. Kingdom advance is very important, but we must be able to culture ourselves into the spiritual system apportioned by God to preserve his ordinances. Every time I study history, my heart is broken. They will tell you about cities like Spokane. They will tell you about several places. Once upon a time, Europe was the center of revival. Are we together? Fire was burning all across the length and the breadth of those territories. And now you would hardly, thank God for the things that are happening. There was a time in the city of Welch, there was a revival that broke out. Men and women caught fire just by reading the move of God on a newspaper. People received impartations, they got born again, they were filled with the Holy Spirit. Growths disappeared from people just reading about a revival. But the system of preservation was not there. So our history books are full of the moves of God, mighty things, dimensions that our generation has not even entered into. But then most of them, the lifespan of that extent of impact was the lifespan of the one who pioneered that move. Usually with the death or the backsliding of the pioneer, the move dies. And dies to a point that it is buried and there is no monument in that territory that testifies that God once moved. Everybody shout, God forbid. God forbid. There must be ordinances preserved, that in life or in death they will know once upon a time God moved across this nation, moved across this city. And there are testaments, not just physical buildings and monuments, but a heritage, a spiritual heritage that has refused to leave. When you travel across the West, I travel across these areas a lot, and I am profoundly touched at how they respect monuments that remind you of certain notable events that once happened in those regions. It could be places of worship, it could be physical monuments, it could be lots of things. I remember one time a few years ago when Kogi and Pastor Alpha was taking us around and we're seeing some of the monuments. They showed me certain places where wars happened. They showed me certain historical things. There must be a system of preserving not just the heritage of being a Christian, but the extent to which God moved must also be captured. It is important that our children know that not only were we Christians, we were men of fire. It is important that our children must know that once upon a time, a preacher can be preaching and the power of God can touch someone miles away. Let me tell you something. When Satan finds out that it is difficult for him to capture a generation, he gives up on that generation and goes to our children and starts growing with them. Satan can be patient for as long as the generation that has sponsored God's move fades away. So he will be silent, and sometimes we will mistake his silence as our breakthrough in the spirit, not knowing that it's an intentional deceit. For many years he can be quiet until those who were at the hallmark of alignment, allowing the purposes of God to be birthed, either through old age or whatever exhaustion. When they fade away, then he grows with a generation that do not know God, a generation that does not know Pharaoh again, a generation that does not know Joseph. Today there are certain buildings that were once centers of revivals. They are clubs today. Do you know why? There was no system of preserving the move of God. That once upon a time, this was a place of encounter. It was a place where people would run to God with their challenges and roll up and down. In Zaria here, there have been physical locations that, because of the extent of the incense that arose to heaven and the sacrifices that conveyed those times, they became portals literally. But many things have happened to them. Oh, yeah. Oh, oh, that there is a way you have been trained to call upon the name of the Lord, and one day you will watch your child in limbo and confusion. You have not taught him. What secret did you carry that made your ministry prosper? Now your son is 22 years. Are you not surprised at the children of some of those who pioneered moves? And you are wondering what happened. Where did the power go to? Gehazi, why did you not receive from Elisha? What happened? There are mantles and graces that are still on earth but are not available for use, because the system of preservation and transference was not there. The West is full of great prophetic movements. Many of them died at infancy, largely due to illiteracy and a quick capture of hell. However, there is still a heritage of the eyes that can see and the ears that can hear. There are still those moves. Are we together? Yes. Our soils and territories are full of stories. You meet an old man and he tells you it was in this location. One day rain was falling everywhere, but you see this house you are looking at, that is now a beer parlor. Rain did not fall there. And then you ask, who was there? They said there was one white man. We don't know his name. We just know that he came from America and spent 2 weeks there. The moment he left, people started falling under the anointing on the street. Where then is that mantle? What was the formula? Nobody was taught. He left or died. And you find out that in that territory, the most powerful person hardly knows God. Guessing all around. We must preserve the curriculum apportioned for us to know God. My generation must know the God I know, not the God they want to know. They must understand his power to the extent to which we allowed him move. And this is what this teaching is aimed at providing us, to open us up to the systems in the spirit that are responsible for preserving divine ordinances, so that one day these little kids playing around, that little boy can hold the mic and say, I remember the name my father called God when I wanted him to heal people. There was a song my father raised every time the power of God was about to move. Whenever I saw my father close his eyes, I understood the meaning. If we ignore our children, we are going to destroy a generation. Most of our parents will tell you they attended T.L. Osborne's crusade, correct? They attended most of these crusades. They will tell you what happened. Some of the generals, some of our parents went abroad at the times of those movements, and they had the privilege to go to those cathedrals. They saw raw power, they saw prophecy, they saw grace. They saw transformation beyond the church walls, and today they sit down with sicknesses ravaging them, and you say, Daddy, do you believe God? He says, I remember in 1971, I remember T.L. Losbon Crusade. What happened? Preservers of the ordinances of God. Are we blessed? I have done my best to study revivals and to study the life of the generals, and every time I study, I see gaps between one generation and another. What did Smith Wigglesworth know that we do not know? What did Catherine Kuhlman know that we do not know? Even if they made mistake, what wrong did they do? We are not even, we only talk about the mistakes. We don't say what, if people walked at that dimension and they still slept, will it not be wise to find out? If I were alive in the days of the generals, I would not yet be qualified to hold a mic. I would be a chief usher. With the level of spiritual development now that we brag around and make noise about, you would dare not hold the mic in those days.